Writing a review for a game like Half-Life over 10 years after the fact is rather difficult. It's rather difficult because, by modern standards, the game is not very good. If it were released today, it would be quite hard to recommend it, while some other older games like System Shock 2 or the original Doom are just as relevant today as they were 10 or 15 years ago, but Half-Life isn't. The fact that Half-Life isn't relevant today is in fact testament to its quality. You see, Half-Life, in all its magnificence, brought about such a paradigm shift in the way games were made, and not just first-person shooter games either, that every game tried to be the next Half-Life. And what this means is that the concepts and ideas that made Half-Life such a magnificent game have been replicated over and over and over. And while few games can be said to be better than Half-Life relative to their peers at their respective time of release, the mechanics which made Half-Life so wonderful have evolved over the years in a pretty significant way. So for a Half-Life virgin, playing the game today would not be a terribly thrilling experience, but anyone who popped their Freeman cherry back in '98 knows that modern computer gaming is split into two eras, pre-Half-Life and post-Half-Life. Make a forum thread asking about the top game stories of all time, and you're guaranteed to get quite a number of people saying Half-Life. It was widely recognised and is fondly remembered as having a great story. The truth is, though, the Half-Life story is nothing special. In fact, it's barely more than a glorified version of Doom's story. An experiment goes terribly wrong at a self-contained underground research facility called Black Mesa, and strange alien monsters materialise from an alternate dimension and start biting people. Soldiers come to, quote, rescue people, though they mostly do this with bullets through the head. Consequently, you find yourself fighting man and alien alike, beginning as survivor and ending as saviour. There's a little extra fluff and some intrigue in the form of the G-Man, but the story is really quite boilerplate. Where Half-Life truly excels is not in its story, but in its storytelling and how the game constructs a world that puts computer game mechanics into a believable context, something games rarely if ever did before Half-Life. The game uses an unbroken narrative structure taking place entirely in first person, with gaps in the storytelling only when Freeman loses consciousness. Storytelling set pieces, like for example how a lift full of scientists plummets past you when you hit the call button, which shows you that the facility is falling apart, makes the gameplay experience and the storytelling mechanics one single inseparable entity, and that enhances the immersive feel of the game a great deal. The game opens with one of the most iconic computer game scenes of all time. It's one that has been emulated in one way or another by most shooters ever since. Rather than being thrown into the game after the disaster with perhaps a screen of text serving as a prologue, the game opens before the disaster. We join Gordon Freeman travelling deep into the bowels of the facility on a tram. It's just an ordinary day and he's just going to work. This tram ride introduces us to the types of environments we can expect to encounter, while the public address system gives us a feel for the general atmosphere of the facility. Most importantly, the Half-Life tram immerses us in the game world right from the start, using believable, authentic, and contextually appropriate mechanics. The idea of authentic and contextually appropriate mechanics was applied to other areas of the game too. Health packs and armour aren't giant floating spinning boxes found hidden in corners, but rather as wall-mounted stations. Something of a contrivance, but far more believable than what had come before. Health packs can be found throughout the game, but usually on tables and counters or in supply crates. Similarly, weapons and ammo aren't simply scattered haphazardly on the floor for no real reason, but rather can be found in supply crates. These moves helped make Half-Life much more engrossing than the shooters that came before it, by supporting computer game mechanics like health and ammo supplies in a much more authentic manner. Many first-person shooters prior to Half-Life, and indeed many subsequent first-person shooters, have had little more than a bunch of guns and a bunch of enemies, with nothing but the gunplay to drive the game forward. And when every level is so interchangeable and every room is more or less the same, this can, and usually does, lead to stagnation. Often in their latter stages, and sometimes as early as the halfway point, Many games, even great games, can become boring simply due to too much repetition. Half-Life deals with this issue masterfully. The game moves back and forth from combat to platforming to unique boss sequences. One moment you're riding a train car through a series of underground tunnels, the next you're fighting a giant three-headed creature that hunts using sound, forcing you to creep around and use grenades as distractions. The next you're battling squads of soldiers in fierce firefights, and the next you're floating around in a bizarre alien world. This constant swapping means you'll never be doing the same thing for too long, so you'll never have the opportunity to become bored throughout the game's 15 or so hours. The combat is perhaps the single most memorable part of Half-Life. The soldiers sent to purge Black Mesa marked a significant step up for artificial intelligence. These guys portray a number of utterly amazing traits. They use grenades to try to flush you out of hiding. They make use of available cover, they crouch to present a smaller target, communicate with each other via radio messages, and they retreat when wounded. These traits combine to make an amazing enemy. They force players to adapt to dynamic combat elements in a way they never had before, while also making the enemy appear to possess a sense of self-preservation. The idea that the enemy wants to kill you but also doesn't want to die makes them feel much more human and much more intelligent than anything that had come before. Their appearance and the sound of their voice are also ridiculously cool. There simply would not be a better enemy until the clone soldiers of Monolith Sphere, some 7 years later. Of course, you aren't just fighting humans. There's also a whole alien infestation to deal with. From the now iconic headcrabs to the Vortigons to bullsquits to numerous others, these aliens appear to be little more than mindless animals, yet they also seem to move with a common purpose, the destruction of humans. These creatures really aren't anything special in terms of how they affect gameplay, but each enemy has a very particular style of attacking, meaning you're constantly having to adapt and adopt different combat strategies, which is something many modern games have gotten away from, sadly. Half-Life isn't the first FPS to blend platforming elements into its core gameplay. I recall playing a game called Exhumed, which for some reason goes by the god-awful name Power Slave in America, some 2 years earlier, which married FPS and platformer, and like Exhumed, Half-Life's platforming aspects are not particularly impressive. Contrasting the rest of the game almost absolutely, Valve never really managed to make these areas feel authentic. In fact, some areas, like a huge expanse with nothing but a series of crates hanging inexplicably at a variety of heights, feel ridiculously contrived. While nothing in particular feels contrived about the alien world of Xen, the end of the game, it is nevertheless the weakest single part of the game, and it's just really fucking annoying, isn't it? Despite the weakness of the platformer areas, they do serve to break up the other elements of the game, which helps with the pacing and prevents stagnation, and this, overall, truly does help the game. I'm not a big fan of mods, mainly because they're mostly multiplayer, and I'm no fan of competitive multiplayer shooters. But Valve's support of the modding community simply cannot go unacknowledged. Through the modding and mapmaking tools released, through Valve's continued support of amateur developers, and through the skill and determination of those modders, some amazing games have been made. Games like Counter-Strike, Day of Defeat, and The Specialists, and even some single-player mods like the magnificent They Hunger. While Valve did not really start anything with the modding scene, they helped keep modding communities alive in the finest tradition of the greatest developers. Male animals of superior breeding and fitness are often kept to stud, their sole purpose being to spread their genes far and wide, and help to make the next generation as strong and fit as they themselves. And while these animals grow old and frail and eventually die, their impact on the gene pool can be seen for generations through their offspring. The exact same thing may be said of Half-Life. It is old now, and frail, and perhaps close to death, but its impact has been so profound, and its influence so widespread, that successive generations of computer games are stronger and fitter as a result. If we were to take a close look at today's, and indeed tomorrow's, greatest first-person shooters, we would surely see more than a little bit of Half-Life looking back at us.